The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to the online launch of AppSense Desktop Now, introducing the latest innovations in desktop management webinar. Your hosts for today are Gareth Kitson, Director of Desktop Solutions, and Simon Townsend, Vice President of Product Management and Enterprise Technologies. Before we get started, I'd like to inform you that this is an interactive session and we welcome your questions or comments at any time. Please use the questions and chat sections within your GoToWebinar panel and the speakers will respond accordingly. At the end of the webinar, we will open the phone lines for further questions, so please ensure you've entered your PIN and you raise your hand on the panel so we can unmute you. At AppSense, we aim to deliver webinars of a high standard and strive to improve at all times. Therefore, we welcome your feedback. At the end of the webinar, there will be a short survey that will help us determine how well we've done and areas we can improve on. There are only 4 short questions that will take you no more than a minute to answer. We will now begin the webinar. Over to you, Gareth and Simon.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Angela. And also thank you everyone for taking the time out to join this webinar today. Hopefully over the next 45 minutes we can share with you some exciting product updates with respect to our existing products and capabilities, but also share with you some of our experiences in customer challenges within end-user computing environments and how we can overcome them. So the agenda is as follows. We're looking at some of the common challenges in end-user computing regardless of industry sector, vertical or size of organization. We're going to introduce user virtualization, which is our technology to deliver a people-centric computing strategy. And we're going to have a discussion between Simon and myself where we'll look at some of those management challenges and specifically how our technology enables organizations and our customers to overcome them and the benefits that it provides to those organizations. And then, as I mentioned just at the beginning there, specifically looking at some of the latest innovations in our most recent release of AppSense Desktop Now. And then, as Angela was saying, opening up for questions and answers. So if you do think of anything that you want to raise at the end, please do use the console and we'll get to you at the end of the webinar. So, without any further ado, let's look at some of the most common desktop challenges that we're all facing. Organizations are looking to get more out of our employee base, out of our users than ever before. And likewise, our productive power users are looking to become as productive as possible to enhance, one, their capabilities within the business and also for career progression as well. And so there's a demand on the IT department from both the business and the user base to enable our users to embrace what we call flexible work styles. So you may be familiar with this, working from different locations, working off-site, working from home, from customer sites, from different devices, not just your desktop PC, so thinking about laptops, tablets, mobility, etc. And doing so in a way that provides a secure and a consistent user experience. So as users want to become more productive by consuming more and more IT services from different locations and devices, we need to at the same time ensure that we do so in a way that is secure and meets any regulatory compliance, etc. So how do we control what a user can access from all of their different access points? What applications are they allowed to execute and when? What data can they connect to and where can they store it? And prevent any unauthorized access to any IT service or assets. And so this is all about de-risking new projects as well. So as we think about mobility, work from home, bring your own device, etc., how can we retain control but without impacting the user's productivity? So there's a fine balancing act there. And then finally on the right-hand side, doing so on an ever-tightening IT budget. So whether it's looking to reduce the initial expenditure and capital cost of adopting a new technology or service, or whether it's about reducing then the ongoing management of either that service or our existing technologies, keeping the lights on and systems running, we need to reduce things such as user migration costs to new platforms, reduce support calls, service requests, improve responsiveness and uptime of our systems. And so there's lots of pressures being placed on the IT service department, coming from both the business, user, and outside their regulatory compliance as well, that are all coming together, and then this is compounded with many different delivery mechanisms and ways that we can deliver applications and desktops to users. So gone are the days of just a standard Windows desktop. We now have mobility initiatives, as I mentioned, smartphones, tablet computers, but also internally lots of different ways in which we can deliver applications, so locally installed. Do we publish them? Do we stream some applications? Do we host virtual desktops, publish desktops, or a combination of different delivery mechanisms for our users depending on where they are and the accessing device that they're using? And so what's actually happening is we're seeing a lot of complexity within our end-user computing environments, and we need to really take a step back and think about how best do we manage the person that's sat in front of that machine accessing those services. And so on the left-hand side of this screen, what I've put together is a very simple diagram showing how desktops can be componentized and split into different layers. So splitting the operating system from the underlying hardware. We can isolate applications with virtualization as well. But fundamentally, unless we separate the user from whatever is being delivered to them, we're going to have to manage the user at multiple points throughout the environment, which of course introduces multiple points of cost and multiple technologies to do so. So it's just adding to the complexity. So what we need to do is turn the model on its head and instead put the user at the center of the focus. So what I'm showing in the upper right-hand corner here is that we can separate the user from their existing desktop stack today. They will remain separate from any new desktop delivery or application delivery mechanism, and we will manage that user centrally and then store their personality in the AppSense infrastructure and then enable us to apply this on demand back to any desktop device, application or operating system to provide, one, a seamless user experience for the user, so aiding their productivity, but also doing so in a way that remains secure and compliant as well. So depending on what's being delivered, we'll tailor the persona that's been laid onto the desktop. And also as a byproduct of this as well, when we retain the user separately from the underlying desktop, we can start to standardize some of those assets themselves. So when we standardize the desktop operating system with gold builds and reduce our application packages, we can start to automate the delivery and then simply tailor and configure and personalize those assets as they're consumed by the user. Very simple, but how do we do it? So this is all about our user-centric approach and putting the user at the center of everything. So whether we're thinking about desktops, setting them up, configuring them, managing their environment, locking it down, etc., we have a product called AppSense Desktop Now. Secondly, we then have data access as well, so not just data access within our corporate environment, but also externally as well. When we're on different devices in different locations, how can we ensure seamless and secure access to the user's data from any location without them having to put things in the cloud and other third-party services? And then also their mobile experience on their smartphones, on their tablets. How do we control what applications can be accessed, what information can be shared between those applications, etc.? And only by putting the user at the very center of our focus and then starting to configure all of these aspects around them can we truly embrace a people-centric IT strategy. And for the purpose of today's call, we're going to look specifically at AppSense Desktop Now. There'll be an element of data now in here as well, but predominantly thinking about our existing desktop estates and how they're changing and evolving. And so some of the key use cases for AppSense Desktop Now, and we're going to look at these in more detail throughout the webinar, would be things such as Windows 7 migrations. How, by separating the user from their existing desktop, can we ease a Windows 7 migration? As part of that, there may be other transformation projects going on, application or desktop virtualization. We may be looking to really secure a desktop for certain use cases as well, looking to control what a user can access and when, with what level of privileges. Or we may be looking to optimize either a brand new desktop environment, so we may be moving to Windows 7. How do we make sure it stays clean and pristine at low cost and reduce the number of support calls coming in? Or we may already have our desktop strategy set up and it's just purely looking at improving user uptime, reducing hardware requirements, service requests, etc. So it's optimizing, one, the user's experience, but also the operations that go to make that. And so for Desktop Now, we have a whole host of capabilities that go towards managing the user's applications, their access, their privileges, and their personalization. And so this looks at things like policy orchestration, setting up and configuring desktops and applications, cross-platform personalization, so we can enable the user to have a seamless experience across XP, Vista, Windows 7, Windows 8, physical or virtual, 32 or 64-bit. Mentioned some of the optimization pieces, dramatically reducing logon times and eliminating profile corruption, so eliminating the headaches associated with roaming profiles, application access control. which is when the user can run an application, maybe dynamically. They're allowed to run things inside the organization, but they can't run the same application when they're not connected to the network. This also involves privilege management, licensing enforcement, and also other areas as well, performance optimization, quality of service, getting more out of our existing hardware, or for new environments, reducing hardware requirements. So there's a whole lot of information that goes to making up a user, and it's through this end-to-end solution of setting up, configuring, personalizing the environment that we can truly embrace a people-centric strategy. And that's delivered through 3 core products: Environment Manager, Application Manager, and Performance Manager. So Environment Manager, as the name suggests, is about setting up an environment, using corporate policy and IT policy to set up, configure, and lock down, but also applying the user's personalization settings on top. Application Manager does, as the name suggests as well, it manages our applications. It manages when we're allowed to execute them, with what level of privileges, admin or standard user, what the applications can connect to, with the application needs to be terminated if the user changes locations, etc. And then Performance Manager is really about getting the most out of our computing resources. It improves quality of service and performance and responsiveness for those authorized applications and desktops. But what it also does, it prevents any resource-intensive applications from monopolizing system resources such as CPU and memory disk, etc. So without any further ado, what I want to actually get to is the meat of the conversation, really, and start with the products and look more about some of the current challenges and projects that many organizations across the board, as I mentioned before, regardless of industry sector, size, or vertical, are facing on a daily basis. And for that, I'd like to introduce Simon Townsend. So, as Angela said earlier, Vice President of our Product Management Division. Simon's been with AppSense for 10 years now, and so really has had a great experience working on the coalface with our enterprise customers to, one, understand their challenges and develop solutions to overcome those challenges that we're going to look at.
Just before we move on, we do have a question, so I will just stop and take a breather. Good afternoon or good morning to those of you that have joined, and thanks for joining. James does have a question which asks whether Environment Manager supports iOS natively now. If we just go back to our 3 product offerings, the Desktop Now suite that we are discussing today, or predominantly today, focuses its attention on Windows-based platforms. So that's Windows XP, Vista 7, and any of the remote desktop services platforms. If you're looking at controlling either at a device or an application level the iOS platform, then you need to come and speak to us about our Mobile Now solution, which in a very similar way puts that control, policy and management around those types of devices. Hopefully that answers your question, James. So I did just want to spend a couple of minutes on 2 topics that we seem to speak to the majority of our customers about, very popular topics that have been around for the last 18 months or 2 years or so, and really I wanted to start with the topic of Windows XP migrations. This date obviously is, and hopefully is familiar to everybody. It's fast approaching. Typically you're sat in one of 3 camps. Either you're one of the 45% of the world that has already migrated, or in fact we're sat in a camp where we are either going through a migration or we're planning to. And I just really wanted to talk about some of the challenges around the migration away from Windows XP, and talk about some of the capabilities that we have in our desktop suite and why we do a lot of work with Microsoft jointly in helping organizations overcome those challenges and get people onto new platforms, predominantly being Windows 7, whether that's natively or virtually. And to state the obvious, the big challenge with the Windows XP desktop is, for many organizations, it's anywhere between a 5 and a 10-year-old estate. And with that age of estate comes a considerable amount of history. And that history is really formed of two things. Number one, there's a lot of IT policy and configuration that's been placed onto that desktop, in some cases many, many years ago. and never been reviewed. And in other cases, for the user, there's an incredible amount of personalization associated with that desktop as well. So there's users and IT have installed applications, users have personalized applications, they've personalized their environment, anything from changing their wallpaper, adding printers, adding drives, setting up applications, defining signatures, and also then their data. And their data has been saved typically either on file shares or in worst case scenarios locally, and hence we end up with data sprawl. And that really causes, that history associated with that 10-year-old desktop really creates big challenges when it comes to moving a user to that Windows 7 platform. If I take a look at any migration, regardless of whether it's a Windows XP or any other form of migration, the number one requirement is to ensure that there is no disruption and there is no loss in productivity from the user's point of view. And really that leads on to, when we're doing that migration, we have to ensure that the new platform looks and feels as similar and as familiar as the old environment did. We have to, where possible, ensure that we bring across what is relevant to the user. So user acceptance is obviously fulfilled, and also then the user can continue to be productive. And that in itself, Gareth, introduces some support questions as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, sure. So again, from working, as Simon was saying, with Microsoft or through working with our customers, we found that one of the biggest hidden costs associated with a Windows migration is often post-migration support. So the user's been provisioned a new Windows 7 environment, looks and feels sort of the same, but there are differences. There's things that may have been missed, and so especially when we consider application upgrades as part of a Windows 7 migration, so moving from Office maybe 2003 to the latest version of Office, if we don't retain a lot of the user's information that they've put into those applications over their several years of XP that enables them to work more efficiently at the speed of thought, things such as custom dictionaries, templates, the way the toolbars look and feel, etc., then that requires a big level of post-migration support, training for users. And while the operations team can swap out some of those devices and upgrade the assets, it's the back-end operations that really feel the brunt of it. And so it's all about making the user productive from day one, and making sure they have the settings they need, and they don't have to re-educate themselves and re-familiarize themselves, instead of just starting working and giving a good customer service to whatever they're doing.
Agreed. I've also put on the slide there. The user is linked to OS, apps, and device, and that fundamentally is the big challenge when we're talking about migration. And we're talking about how can we migrate the user's persona, that history that I talk about, over to the new platform. And really, the problem is that somewhere buried inside that Windows XP machine, inside the profile, is all of the settings and all of that history that the user has spent all of those years configuring. Technically there's a problem because as we go from Windows XP to Windows 7, we're moving from what's known as a V1 profile to a V2. Technically there's a problem in many cases because we're going from 32-bit to 64-bit, and technically there can be a problem when someone's looking at going from Windows XP to perhaps a remote desktop services, a deployment of a new desktop as well. The distribution of those Windows XP devices and the one-to-one relationship that we see commonly between the user and their device also causes a challenge. Organizations can't afford to do big bang rollouts. Nobody can. So doing a phased migration, but doing a phased migration with a dispersed set of devices and users makes life even more difficult. And lastly there, really, we find that a lot of organizations, not only are they doing a Windows 7 upgrade, but they're also looking at optimizing that desktop moving forward. So not only are they looking at, for instance, just getting the user onto 7, but they're now looking at how they're going to patch that moving forward, how they're going to deploy applications. Are they going to virtualize the desktop? Are they going to move to VDI? Perhaps are they going to be packaging applications in a different way, via SCCM, for instance? Are they going to be virtualizing those apps by using something like AppV? And whilst all of those technologies provide massive benefit once the user gets to Windows 7, there are challenges around how do we get that information across to the new platform. And that leads me nicely, or hopefully nicely, onto some of our capabilities and benefits. And I apologize to those that may already be aware of this, but we really look at how we can, at an enterprise level, scale out a methodology that allows people in a phased approach to migrate seamlessly to Windows 7. And the way in which we do that is 4 steps, as it says there. We actually analyze and capture on the existing Windows XP estate, store that information separately, store that history and that persona separately, and then apply that on demand when the user chooses, or when IT chooses to use that user onto a new platform. If someone's doing application virtualization or upgrading the application, AppSense can also help, being as we can take settings and personalization from a natively installed application and run them to, for instance, an AppV instance of that application. Application packaging itself becomes far simpler, and the amount of packaging that we do means you only need to package an application once, because in that new environment you can also use the AppSense Desktop Now suite to actually configure and control those new applications. From a data point of view, the data on a Windows XP machine could be here, there, and everywhere. And one of the challenges we've got, in the same way that we do with the personalization, is we really need to get that information, capture it, and bring it back to a central location. That doesn't mean, for instance, put it in a new container or moving it to the cloud. That means utilizing your existing infrastructure and your existing storage, bringing that data off the endpoint, bringing it into the data center, and therefore allowing the user to access that same data seamlessly when they log on to that Windows 7 environment and or any other platform they may be using, including mobile devices. So with our Data Now product, that actually gives us a solution to help people migrate data off that Windows XP estate as well. The terminology we like to use at AppSense is echoed by a large number of our customers. Many of our customers talk about the Windows 7 migration is the last migration they want to do in an organization. It's not necessarily the last Windows platform that they will move to. They will continue to move to Windows 8 and Windows 9, but nobody wants to go through this pain again. Nobody wants to go through the migration process again. And with inside AppSense, the word migration typically means a one-way move, whereas AppSense, we actually give people the ability to move in both directions. We've got customers, for instance, that allow their users to migrate to 7, and if things do go wrong during that phased upgrade, then they can actually move the settings back onto the Windows XP until user acceptance has been resolved, for instance. Because of the way that our technology works and because of how we're essentially managing and storing that user information, it does mean that I can swap, for instance, platforms and application deployment technology in and out of my environment and still yet allow that persona to carry across. And as you can see there in the graphic in the top right, it really doesn't matter what technology we're deploying, whether it is a virtual desktop, a terminal services environment, whether we're streaming apps, whether we're streaming desktops, or layering them, in fact, or just providing them with a BYOD, go and buy your own laptop, we have the ability to manage that user centrally regardless of device or platform. So, second thing we wanted to talk to you about today was Windows Privilege Management. So I will just hand back over to Gareth quickly.
Sure. So when we think about Windows Privilege Management, it's always good to set the scene, and like setting the scene, and what I'm thinking towards is the two main ways in which we can deliver a desktop experience to a user, and the two strategies. One would be to lock down the user as much as possible and control that asset, and the other would be to provide freedom and flexibility. And so it's a balancing act between user demand and IT's security and what they're willing to offer in terms of flexibility. Now, if we look at any type of analyst report, we can pick any reports up and think about the different types of users and their desktop management levels. If we think about the unmanaged user, for example, we're all familiar that unmanaged users, so typically local administrators, free to install their own applications and make their own changes to the desktops, they've given this privilege for a reason, because they require that flexibility. They require application applications that require admin rights, or they have tasks that they need to perform that require admin rights. And so as such, they have the freedom to also introduce business risk and security risks into the environment. And so as such, that brings with it a higher level cost of support, whether it's through support cases where the user may have misused or broken something, introduced something they shouldn't have done. Basically, they're introducing an element to increase the opportunity and window of cost. On the other hand, we have what's called the lockdown well-managed environment, which in theory should increase IT control, IT security, and reduce that window of opportunity for risk, because it prevents the user from installing applications and making changes to the system, making changes to settings, stopping services, doing certain tasks, etc. What we actually find for a certain type of user is that this actually hinders their productivity. It stops them from working and being productive, and so as such, costs start to increase again, because now the end user is logging service requests for, I can't run this application, I need a different way to run this application, and we're back to square one. It's a catch-22. So what we actually need to do is think about how do we dynamically give the user everything they need and nothing else based on who they are, where they are, and the device that they're using. So Windows Privilege Management is about finding that sweet spot which meets the flexibility and the productivity requirements of the user, the control and the security for the IT department, and does so at the best possible price point. So thinking about how do we, first of all, eliminate the local admin account out of our environment. That's a major root cause for concerning costs. So the goal could be to eliminate the need for the local admin account, but ensure user productivity, so enable them to still run the applications that require admin rights or perform some nominated tasks, and we can delegate which users can perform what tasks. We're meeting both needs for security and also productivity. So the benefits there is not only we're reducing our desktop costs, but we're actually improving our control of the desktop, we're increasing security and user productivity and satisfaction at the same time. Simon?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely common. We've definitely seen a massive increase in the amount of people that are, whether it's part of a strategic Windows 7 migration or whether it's just solving this tactical problem, we've definitely seen an increase in the amount of people that need to remove admin privileges from their users. The simple way, for instance, to allow a user to run an application or perform a task that needed admin rights historically was to just give them full-blown administration rights. And obviously that does have, as Gareth said, a security and cost implication. But from an AppSense point of view, not only can we deal with that, but actually we would sort of take a broader look at privilege management and actually start to look at, okay, well, actually is the user allowed to install or actually allowed to run this application in the first place? And actually for those people that have known AppSense for a while, for the last 12, 13 years, we have been providing solutions that actually manage, for instance, what executables and what tasks, for instance, people are or are not allowed to execute based on certain criteria and conditions. So first of all, we really want to choose, are they allowed to run it in the first place? The second piece really addresses that problem that the majority of our customers are looking to solve at the moment, which is around privileges. Either elevating, for instance, certain tasks or applications to standard users, or de-elevating certain tasks that, for instance, administrators may take out. And we've got some additional news on that piece towards the end of this session anyway, around privilege management specifically. But one of those key capabilities, just to sort of point out, is if you are looking at removing admin privileges from your Windows environment today, then one of the capabilities we can deal with is in that area specifically. Once you've allowed or denied, and once you've decided whether you're going to elevate or de-elevate, for instance, you may then, particularly at an application level, may then need to look at, okay, where can that application or that particular feature within the operating system connect to? Can it, for instance, connect to certain parts of the network, certain IP addresses on certain ports? Do I want to restrict third parties using an ITA client or the RDP client from connecting to my back-end terminal servers, for instance? Do I want to control what URLs or websites or internal web-based delivered applications users have got access to from within Internet Explorer? So functionality and capabilities around network access control and URL redirection, for instance, are also are common within the Desktop Now suite. I've also got a wealth of resources that the user and the applications need access to. Printers, drives, parts of the registry, for instance, parts of the actual application UI that may or may not need restricted depending on who that user is, where they're coming from, or other types of context. And as we've said lastly, the need to decide whether we actually want to personalize and keep that particular application or feature personal to user as they roam from one environment to another. So really, from a privilege management point of view, when we start to look at the operating system and we start to look at the applications, it's not just about should they run with an administrative token, for instance. It's actually more about a much broader picture. And obviously AppSense has got capabilities within Desktop now that fulfill all of those areas.
I think the important piece to note on this as well, whether we're looking at whether an application is allowed to run or not, or what level of privileges and the other aspects, is taking into consideration where that user is at that point in time. So when we're thinking about flexible work styles, different devices and locations, by interrogating the device and putting together a configuration that is based on who they are, where they are, the time of day, whatever they may be doing, the t-shirt colour that they're wearing, we can truly set a people-centric approach that dynamically configures everything that's delivered to the user. So one, flexible work styles, tick. Secondly, security, tick. And it's all done, essentially managed once, and it's managed then everywhere. So yeah, the cost points as well.
Yeah. So that sort of focuses our attention on predominantly around the challenges and the capabilities that we have around Windows 7 migrations and privilege management. I do now want to spend the next 10 minutes providing you with an update from the latest release of the Desktop Now suite. It was actually in February, at the end of February, that we actually released the AppSense Desktop Now suite. For those of you that have looked at or have worked with AppSense for a given amount of time, you'll know that prior to that, the suite was actually known as the AppSense Management Suite. That management suite is now probably about 12 years old. The majority of the products are fairly mature on version 8, version 7, for instance. So moving forward, we've just renamed that management suite to Desktop Now to bring it in line with those other products around data and mobile as well. As we look at, for instance, our customer base, and as we are utilized in more ways and people use more and more of our capabilities, the amount of administrators and users of our software has actually started to increase. So as for instance, a desktop or an end-user computing person may utilize our technology to help with the Windows 7 migration, and someone else in security may utilize our solution to deal with privilege management, the number of people that need to touch and utilize our software has increased. And that has actually driven us to put more features into our product around how, for instance, we actually configure our product and deploy our product at scale within the enterprise. And that really started probably about 6 months ago with the introduction of self-service portals and first-line support portals for our products, where users themselves and support staff needed the ability to interact with our technology to actually either self-resolve or resolve on behalf of the users some of the common challenges around profile management. What's new? A couple of things I want to start with. Number one is patch management. AppSense fully supports the concepts of patching. We deliver our patching now as of the February release, utilizing MSPs, which means not only can we deliver, for instance, the customer updates significantly quicker, but also it allows us to deploy, manage, and, if needed, remove patches significantly quicker. But also the ability to do configuration layering and merging. And this really comes back to the various different departments and different roles within an organization that now need to touch and configure our technology. So typically what we have here in this example is an example of our environment manager product. You can see here that at logon, we are doing a particular action. That action may be putting items on the desktop. It may be mapping drives, maybe mapping printers, for instance. We've also got a second trigger there that says when Notepad is started, it wants to do something else. Now, we've hidden the detail of what the actions are there, but there are two triggers there. We want to do something at logon. We want to do something when Notepad starts. So that, for instance, may have been a configuration that was built by the person that owns the Windows desktop. If I now look at someone like an application packager who's actually saying, well, actually, I want to deploy out a new version of IE. I want to upgrade to IE or deploy out a new application environment. What they will be using AppSense for is actually configuring and personalizing those applications. So as opposed to having to open up the existing configuration, we've got this concept now of being able to configure just snippets of information, as you can see in the update in the middle of the screen, which then can be merged, layered, and audited, providing rollback capabilities, for instance, and merged down on the endpoint. And this gives us the ability to not only just deploy snippets of configurations, but also to be able to audit who's made those changes, and if needed, then also roll back those changes to, for instance, the known good deployed version. What else is new as of February? PowerShell support across the suite has been introduced, commonly now replacing VB scripting. We use PowerShell within our products across the suite to perform actions or do condition checks that may natively not be within the product. And we've also uplifted the amount of API support that we've got both at the agent level and within our infrastructure. And this has really been driven by some of our largest enterprises that are looking at how they integrate AppSense into their workflows, how they go about automating some of the common tasks and common functionality within our product. We continue, for instance, to improve upon our wizards and our templates. AppSense is now deployed to probably over about 3,500 companies globally. Some of those customers now are in excess of 100,000 users in size. 50% of our install base is actually on a native Windows desktop, the remainder on a terminal server or VDI space. So a lot of those organizations now are rolling AppSense out to manage their entire estate, and with that comes a massive increase in the number of applications, for instance, that people want to be able to personalize and configure. And we collect our experience and our knowledge either from our own professional services teams, our resellers and our customers through customer councils, and bring that knowledge into the product and continually look at how we can actually assist organizations in evaluating quicker, moving to a proof of concept quicker, and therefore deploying quicker. The last thing I wanted to touch on from a features point of view was our integration into System Center 2012. Predominantly, lots and lots of our customers today use SCCM and Config Manager, for instance. So we now have the ability to open and save configurations directly into that technology ready for deployment at a global scale. We've also, as part of the API work, done a lot of work around automation and workflow in some of the Apollo technology that has come along as part of the acquisition that Microsoft made last year. Last thing I want to talk about today very quickly is a new product. And that new product is there to address that tactical challenge that we talked about earlier around privilege management, and specifically around dealing with Windows admin rights and the need that many, many organizations have got now to remove Windows admin rights. So I'm very pleased to announce that we have looked at that particular piece of functionality and that capability, and we now have what's known as a user rights management edition of Application Manager, specifically targeted at dealing with the user rights piece, the privilege management piece on a Windows desktop. Can be used to de-elevate, for instance, administrators, can be used to elevate administrators when they're performing certain tasks or running certain applications. very, very powerful tool, very, very commonly used now, and the URM edition delivered at a price point that is reflective of that particular problem. Fully upgradable to our Application Manager product, and has got all of the monitoring, auditing, and reporting that you would care to see. With that, I'll hand over to Gareth. I think we've got 2 or 3 more slides, and then we'll wrap up for questions.
Excellent. Yes. So just touching on that, if you do have any questions, now's the time to get them in the console, and Simon and myself will happily answer them. Now, just before we wrap up, and Simon touched on some of the customers. Yes, there's several thousand customers out there in different industry sectors, and while some of them it's great that they've been forthcoming and helped us with video testimonials and case studies which are available on our website, it's also good to get some third-party, impartial, independent analyst validation as well. So there's various reports validating, one, the requirement for user virtualization and people-centric computing as a forward-thinking computing strategy, but specifically looking at the technology that AppSense provides. What is the financial impact and the savings that can be achieved through adopting the technology? And so what's happened is Forrester Research have conducted independent research interviewing many AppSense customers across different geographies, sizes, scales, and industry sectors, and built a composite model. And that composite model has returned savings of 284% return on investment for the initial investment in AppSense technology. That comes with a payback period of just 5 months and a net present benefit of 1.8 million. And so that model was actually built on interviewing, as I say, several different customers and building a composite model of 2,500 user organization. And it's through the management then of enabling quantifiable operational improvements, so as you say, reducing support requirements, reducing hardware capital expenditure, reducing downtime which is associated with profile corruption, log-on times, user rights management and privilege management, etc. This all comes together to give a very, very clear and accurate financial saving. So not just enabling projects to happen from a mobility or an operations perspective, but actually bringing tangible financial savings as well. So just to recap there, 284% return on investment, which is realized with a 5-month payback period and a net benefit of $1.8 million based on real-world investigation and pulling this together as an average 2,500 user organization. And so with that in mind, if you do have any questions, we're going to open up the GoToWebinar console now and take some of them that have been coming through.
You have got one on the panel, if you answer that one first.
Okay, let me just find it. Questions. What patterns and issues do you see going forward with update management related to Adobe, Flash Reader, and Java? I'm not sure whether that is referring particularly to the privilege management functionality and how, for instance, if we were to remove admin privileges from a desktop, how we deal with that. If that is the case, then one of the features that I didn't cover today that we have added in recently is a concept of metadata support. And this gives us the ability to actually intelligently understand who the vendor of an application is, or other types of metadata about a particular application, that actually gives us the ability to say, even though the user is a standard user, when we see a particular, for instance, application or installer such as Adobe, such as Flash, such as Java, for instance, that needs to update, we can actually allow that, elevate it, allow it to install, and then allow it to be used. So we've actually taken a really good look at that particular use case and simplified how, for instance, we can very easily remove admin privileges but still use the Desktop Now technology to elevate where needed. I'm hoping that's right. James has asked questions. So the new product we mentioned on user rights, is that new functionality or just a different way to buy your existing rights management? So The code base is exactly the same. So Application Manager that's within the Desktop Now suite has a whole host of functionality, from controlling applications, dealing with privilege management, providing URL redirection, performing license, allowing you to do license control, as well as auditing and reporting. The User Rights Management Edition is simply a cut-down version of that particular technology and product, just focusing its attention on the privilege management aspects. They both have introduced in the latest release new functionality, as I just mentioned there, around metadata. So it doesn't matter whether you are a Desktop Now customer, an Application Manager customer, or just someone that has the User Rights Management Edition. Everybody benefits from every incremental release of the code.
Okay.
Thanks for your question, James.
Thanks, Simon and Gareth. We are at the time now, so we're at the end of the webinar. Thank you very much for your hosting. I hope that was useful for everybody. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.
The organizer has